Gondor knew Arathorn's royal blood, but when his moment came, the doors stayed firmly shut. The truth behind why Aragorn's father was never crowned is not about missing lineage, it is about a kingdom that made acceptance political, not personal. What ancient decision turned Gondor against its northern heirs, and how did that lock out a king in waiting? This story unravels where bloodline lost to power, and why it would take catastrophe to change the rules. Third Age 1944. King Ondoher of Gondor falls in battle against the Wainriders, and with him die both his sons, Artemir and Faramir. The royal line in Gondor is left without a direct male heir. In the year that follows, Third Age 1945, the kingdom stands at a crossroads, its throne unclaimed and its future uncertain. Arvedui, King of Arthedain in the north and husband to Firiel, Ondoher's only surviving child, sends a formal claim to Gondor's council. His case rests on two pillars. First, descent from Isildur, the elder son of Elendil. Second, marriage into the southern royal house. In his letter, Arvedui invokes the ancient law of Numenor, which allowed inheritance through the eldest child when no son survived, and he argues that the lines of Elendil and Anarion are now united in him. The Council of Gondor, led by Steward Pelenda, receives Arvedui's claim. Their reply is direct and decisive. Gondor, they say, does not recognize any overlordship from the north. The kingship of Gondor belongs to the heirs of Anarion by its own law and tradition. The council asserts that the crown has never passed to a woman, nor through a woman to her husband, and they will not change this law now. Instead, they choose Eärnur, a southern general and distant kinsman, to be king. The record in the Tale of Years is brief but decisive. A northern king with a strong bloodline is refused. This moment proves that Gondor's
council, not genealogy alone, determines who may rule. The rejection sets a precedent and draws a cultural line in the sand, a closed door that will shape the fate of later claimants.
A single decision in Gondor's council chamber did more than settle a succession. It drew a boundary that would last for centuries. The rejection of Arvedui's claim was not just about one king or one moment. It became a story retold in noble halls and echoed in the chronicles of Gondor. Southern lords, stewards and soldiers absorbed the lesson. The throne of Gondor belonged to the south, to the heirs of Anarion, and not to distant northern kin. Over time, this consensus hardened. The council's choice was woven into Gondor's identity, shaping how its leaders viewed outsiders and how they explained their own history. Scholars describe this as a cultural memory, a precedent that lived on not in law books but in the expectations of every noble house and councillor. Gondor's elite treated the idea of a northern king as something closed off, a path not just untaken but forbidden by the very fabric of their society. When the northern Dunedain faded into legend, their claim to the crown faded with them. For generations, the locked door remained invisible but unyielding. Anyone born to the northern line, like Arathorn, would find not an open invitation, but a wall of tradition and silent refusal. The council's answer to Arvedui became more than a verdict. It became the rule by which Gondor lived, and by which all future claimants would be measured. A 2050. Eärnur, the last king of Gondor, rides out from Minas Tirith with a handful of knights. His destination is Minas Morgul, where the Lord of the Nazgul has issued a challenge that cannot be ignored. Eärnur passes through the gates and vanishes from all records. No word, no survivor, no sign of his fate. He leaves behind no wife, no child, and no direct successor. Gondor's throne stands empty, the line of kings at an end. In the silence that follows, Mardal Voronwë, Steward of Gondor, assumes the rule. The chronicles record that from this year onward, Mardal and his descendants govern the realm. No king is crowned. The stewards rule in the king's name, but with each passing year, their authority grows less provisional and more permanent. The empty throne becomes a symbol, untouched but not forgotten. Gondor's people and nobility adapt to a new order, one where the steward commands armies, receives allegiance, and makes law. The monarchy does not return. Instead, the office of steward becomes the heart of Gondor's government, enduring for almost 1,000 years. The chronicles of the realm shift their focus, listing stewards with the same weight and ceremony once reserved for kings. By the late Third Age, the Stewards of Gondor had become the accepted rulers of the realm. Their authority was not provisional or hesitant, but deeply woven into the daily life and expectations of Gondor's people. The throne in the Hall of Kings stood empty, but the steward's seat was never vacant. For nearly 1,000 years, the line of Mardul governed, commanding armies, receiving oaths, and issuing decrees with the weight once reserved for kings. Public ceremonies, legal documents, and the rituals of state all centered on the steward's office. The monarchy was not abolished by law, but it became a distant memory, preserved in song and symbol rather than in practice. Among Gondor's nobles and city dwellers, loyalty shifted naturally to the House of Húrin, whose succession felt as stable and legitimate as any royal line. In this environment, the idea of a northern heir was not just unfamiliar, it was unthinkable. For someone like Arathorn II, chieftain of a scattered northern remnant, there was no path to acceptance. His brief life, spent defending a hidden people in the wilds, never intersected with the corridors of power in Minas Tirith. The institutions of Gondor had closed ranks long before he was born, leaving no invitation for an outsider, no matter his bloodline. Aragorn's path to acceptance in Gondor was forged on the edge of disaster. When the armies of the West faltered, he led the Grey Company through the haunted paths of the dead, a route only the true heir of Isildur could command. In that shadowed passage, Aragorn summoned the Oathbreakers, wielding a forgotten authority that no steward or southern lord could claim. This act was more than bravery, it was an ancient right made real, and it brought a force no one else could have mustered to the fields of Pelargir. There, Aragorn seized the Corsair fleet, turning what should have been Gondor's doom into its salvation. Black sails that promised ruin became the banners of hope as his ships arrived at Minas Tirith. In the aftermath, with the city wounded and its leaders fallen, Aragorn entered the Houses of Healing. Using Athelas, he healed Faramir, Éowyn, and Merry, fulfilling the old saying that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. For soldiers, nobles, and citizens alike, these deeds broke the silence of centuries. Doubt gave way to awe. The barriers that held back the northern line for 1,000 years began to fall, not because of heritage alone, but because Gondor saw what only a king could do. In the aftermath of Gondor's darkest hour, the city's battered defenders looked for more than ancestry. The old stories of blood and right were still spoken, but the faces in the crowd remembered who had stood with them, who had brought hope when hope seemed lost. Aragorn's deeds, summoning the dead, seizing the Corsair fleet, and healing the wounded, became proof that legitimacy was no longer measured by lineage alone. Gondor's scholars later wrote that true kingship revealed itself through action, not inheritance. In council halls and crowded streets, the question shifted from "Who is your father?" to "What have you done for Gondor?" Public trust, once reserved for the House of Anarion or the Stewards, now turned to the one who had delivered the city from ruin. The acceptance of a northern heir was not a return to an old order, but the birth of a new standard. The ruler Gondor needed was the one who could restore and protect, regardless of where his line began. Gondor's throne was not held by blood alone, but by the will of its people, until a crisis forced them to reconsider. Today, legitimacy still hinges on timing and acceptance, not ancestry. Power changes hands not just by right, but by need. The lesson endures. History waits for no one.